Okay, so we're recording this session just so that it's available afterwards for the both of you and anybody else on the module who wants to have a look. The purpose of what I want to have a look at this afternoon is just to run through the assignment and to uh, just sort of give you sort of my expectations in terms of what's worth including, what isn't worth including, the types of things to perhaps target for each of the sections of the assessment. It won't be a particularly long session, but hopefully it'll just give you a bit of an overview in terms of what we're looking for. So, the first, and I think probably the most important part for me, is that it is a 3,000 word assessment. Now, you will get marked down if you go over the words. At the same time, you're not likely to hit the criteria as well as you can if you are significantly under words. So really you need to aim for that 3,000 words. Now it is arguable that there are certain things that you don't have to include as word count. So for example, if you include appendices and other bits and pieces. But importantly, it's the elements that are included in the word count that are what are going to be marked. So that's where you have to include the information that you want to be assessed, rather than trying to supplement the word count with lots of appendices and other additional areas. So as far as I'm concerned, really hitting the question is crucial. There's no need to write a lot around it and do a lot of sort of lengthy introductions and other bits and pieces. What I really want you to do is to target the question, answer the question. Now that might seem a little unfinished, but crucially, that is what we're after. Okay, and this assessment is a two-part assessment. Now you've been provided with an additional document all about sustainability in small business, and that's what we're focusing on in this particular assessment. The idea is that we're going to assess two things really: how useful sustainability could be for small businesses, and also how we then integrate sustainable objectives into small businesses. So first off, we start with question 1, which is about evaluating the advantages that embedding sustainability practice would have for small businesses. Now, in the document that came with the assignment brief, it's quite a lengthy document, lengthy-ish, about 12 pages. What it has is it gives us a sort of business case for the integration of sustainable objectives into SMEs. So that is a good point and a good area to base your answer on. Okay, and there are really good little sections and bits and pieces in sort of small boxes within the supporting document to help you with the sort of consideration of advantages. Okay, now you could consider this in a sort of localized context, but also broad sort of non-industry specific issues should also be considered as part of your answer to this. So I'm not going to tell you necessarily what areas to look at in terms of advantage, but really broadly speaking, we're looking at why should we integrate sustainability into a business. That's what we're looking at. Now SMEs are a good target point to use to answer that question, because they tend to be more agile and more able to integrate things much easier than a larger organisation. There's 50% of the word count available here, and therefore I'd be looking for around about 1,500 words. Now, in order to get the depth, in order to do this critical evaluation, what I would recommend that you do is that you look at fewer advantages, but look at them in greater depth. So were you to, for example, select 3 advantages, and to sort of divide your word count up amongst that, you're going to be able to get that sort of level of criticality much more easily than if you try to do too many. Now, in terms of this sort of critical element, that's all about how well you're using additional sources and how well you're referencing the sources that you use. So I will expect to see plenty of references to support the ideas that you're suggesting as being advantages that they would generate. Being critical of it, you need to consider essentially how much of an advantage would embedding sustainability provide in these different areas. So, just to provide you with an example, it may well be that an advantage of sustainability that you wish to discuss is or relates to the sort of retention of customers, for example. So whilst that is clearly an advantage, and you would reference where that advantage came from, you would then need to be critical in terms of how much of an advantage is that. Is it more of an advantage or less of an advantage relative to other things? Let me just pause there for a moment to welcome Philip. Welcome to the session. This has been recorded, so you'll be able to catch up with the earlier parts of it if you log back on after, in about an hour or so, then the recording will be available. So, just to recap then on question 1, depth is probably more important than breadth as far as I'm concerned. So don't limit yourself in terms of how much discussion you can have by trying to look at too many advantages. Pick a few and work with them to a good level of depth. I'm just going to pause there for a moment because I believe we've got a question on the way. A couple of questions, in fact. Yeah, please ask questions. That's fine. You jump straight in there and ask a question. Please do. See, Douglas is busy typing away as well. Okay, yes, Douglas. So what is it specifically around that area that you want to ask? Okay, I'm going to come to your question. I'll talk about question 2 in a minute. Okay, and I'll try and address what you're asking me there. In terms of Douglas's question, what I'm sort of inferring here, Douglas, is that obviously certain different industries and different sectors are going to have different interpretations of the sort of integration and advantages that sustainability would have. So what I'm saying here is that instead of exploring something that is sort of extremely specialist and sort of targeted at one particular industry, just to sort of look at it in a kind of in a broader manner. So for example, would the embedding of sort of sustainable accounting may impact on sort of the overall health of a business regardless of the sector in which it operates. That's what we're kind of driving at here, rather than trying to be overly focused on one particular industry. Does that answer your question there, Douglas? Okay, good. So move on to question 2 briefly, then probably we can kind of target the other question as well. So this one's a more applied thing. So you're going to select an SME organisation where you are. Now, I don't want pages and pages of background about it, just state what it is. Okay? And we need to think about how they could integrate sustainable practice into that particular business. This is where we can be a little bit more targeted. Okay? And there are a few things for us to consider. Crucially, the practical and ethical issues are the ones that we need to bear in mind the most. You could argue that, well, integrating sustainability is always ethical, but there may be things that we need to think about. So, in terms of doing this, what I want you to do is to make these suggestions and to justify the suggestions. Okay? So, whatever the methods are that you choose, you think are going to be relevant in terms of embedding these sustainable objectives, okay, then that's fine. Okay? I suggest that you base it on an established approach, and that you really justify what you're doing. Say what it is that you're going to do, and give the why you're going to do it that way. The sort of the because type questions. In terms of this this sort of drafting of a route map, that can be presented in different ways. The crucial thing to this is that you're showing that you have considered how you would carry forwards ideas in terms of integration through to actual successful integration. If we have a look at sort of the objectives, what it's asking us to do is to look at the applying a reflective, ethical and professional approach to the application of sustainable strategy and the development of principles. So what we're looking for here is that you've thought out how it's going to happen. Okay. Now, if you want to do that in a sort of a graphical timeline kind of way, where you have some information on a stage and information on another stage across a 2-year period, that's fine. If you just wanted to put that in a sort of logical, sequential order of things that you would do, then again, that is fine. Crucially, you want to link it to this sort of 2-year idea. You know, how can we sort of integrate things over that sort of 2-year period of time? So really, however you want to display that is fine, as long as it has the sorts of level of detail in there that shows what's going to be done when, and crucially the sort of whys of it. Now again, we're looking at 1500 words here, so the depth is important. I recommend sort of setting, again, fewer and more in-depth objectives rather than trying to do everything. Okay, that's the important thing. So have a little consideration about that. Okay, and if you've got any questions, please ask.